Thinking about what cars and trucks are going to look like in the future has always been fun. But because of climate change, we've also started to speculate about what's going to make them go. And what was fun is now very serious. Transportation is responsible for as much as 25% of greenhouse gases, and we have just a few years, experts say, to radically reduce emissions. Can we do it? It was a lifelong interest in cars that persuaded Dutchman Paul Nieuwenhuis to study the motor industry. A business academic as well as an environmentalist and motoring journalist, he has acted as an advisor to the European Commission, the United Nations, OECD and UK and Wales government departments. Euronews met Dr Nieuwenhuis at Cardiff Business School, part of Cardiff University, where he is co-director of the prestigious Centre for Automotive Industry Research. It was here that he developed his special interest in the problems of making personal mobility compatible with the need for sustainability. Now, it seems that the problem is urgent, and I have heard the figure 10, 15 years as being the time when the car industry should adapt. Is it possible?
The urgency is difficult to assess. We're relying on climate scientists, of course, but I mean, they are, every time they come out with a new report, it calls for greater urgency. So obviously that is a big issue. In addition to climate change, we've also got depleting resources. We know there are limited reserves of cheap oil. I mean, oil will last for a long time, but cheap oil is in limited supply. In spite of the fact that the European Commission is actually going to mandate these much lower emissions, the fact is that there are 800 million vehicles on the road now, which are likely to be on the road, many of them, in 15 years' time, which will not have been modified, which will not comply with these regulations. What are we going to do about them? Well, as oil becomes more expensive, and of course if cars become more energy efficient, now what happens to the old cars? Well, some of them may just become too expensive to run and may to that extent become obsolete. They are no longer efficient enough to be used on a daily basis. And I think that's just something. It might be one of the few areas in the environmental world where market mechanisms might just about solve the problem. I think many of the general public are expecting a rather smooth transition from the internal combustion engine through to some alternative method of powering vehicles. You know, my next car will be electric, my next car will be biofuels, my next car will be hydrogen, it will be a combination of the two. How realistic is that expectation, do you think? The next step that the industry is moving towards production within the next few years is a plug-in hybrid, where as well as having the internal combustion engine to create electricity, you can also plug it into the mains and charge up your battery that way. So that's the next step. The world is still too complex and too diverse to come with a single solution. We've worked with a single solution now for 70, 80 years or something like that. But that system is coming under strain. Oil might be the ideal fuel if you're in the Middle East, in an oil-rich nation. But if you're in Iceland, for example, where you've got lots of geothermal and hydropower, electricity or hydrogen are much more logical solutions. If you're in Brazil, which is one of the few places where biofuels can really be made in a carbon-neutral way, then biofuel is the logical solution. And bioethanol is, in fact, the most popular vehicle fuel in Brazil today. If we have local solutions where car manufacturers are producing different vehicles in different parts of the world, what does this do to the current model of car company, which produces models broadly for the whole world? How is that going to affect them? A mass production system wants identical products, as you say, across the world. And the car companies have tried world cars, and it's never really worked. So we've long worked with an alternative business model, whereby you say, well, you must produce what is common to all vehicles. And this could be basic body structures, for example, wheels, tires, that sort of stuff, perhaps basic transmission modules, or some parts of an internal combustion or electric powertrain, and then everything else about the car you configure locally. So you would go into your local small car factory, probably the size of this workshop, and you say, I'll have one of those, but I want it in that color, I want those seats in it, I want that kind of powertrain in it, I want that much fuel to carry, I want the, etc., etc. And you configure your own car. The car is then built specifically for your needs at that local factory, using local labor and using local suppliers to a large extent, in addition to those shared mass-produced bits. You get rid of car dealers. Your car dealer becomes your car manufacturer becomes your car dealer. And it's rooted in local economies.
What car do you expect to be driving yourself in 10 to 15 years' time?
Well, something much lighter than today and much more fuel efficient, possibly a plug-in hybrid or some form of hybrid.
Not an electric car?
Not a fully electric car. There's still issues about battery range, but I mean, you could have a system whereby you have an electric car for urban use, for example, and you have a hybrid for longer distances. That is a possible solution.
Okay.